Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Illuminati, the man who rules the world, takes on the head of the global elite in this all-new action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Kamala Harris has finally chosen her vice presidential running mate for the 2024 presidential election, and he's proving to be just as underwhelming a candidate as she is in energizing the base to have a reason to vote blue in 2024. Now, Kamala Harris has decided to choose Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate as vice president in the 2024 presidential election, and this decision to choose Tim Walz over more popular individuals like Josh Shapiro and Gavin Newsom basically show me that Kamala Harris is basically not being seen as a serious contender for the 2024 presidential election. Now, Kamala Harris was thrown into the race for president after President Joe Biden wound up being forced to step down after a disastrous performance on a debate that was broadcast on ABC against Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. And after the ignominious end of Joe Biden in that disastrous debate performance that was basically set up to make Joe Biden a serious contender, what happened was, at 81 years old, Joe Biden had an episode on the air that basically made people question his competence or capability to be the president of the United States if he was to get reelected. And with that whole incident that happened on that debate, the Blue Party basically had to scramble after Joe Biden was made to step down and not run for re-election, and due to constitutional law, they had to use Kamala Harris as their candidate. And this whole decision to pick Tim Walz basically shows me that the Blue Party isn't as desperate as many think they are. No, what's happening here is that the Blue Party basically realizes it's screwed and is basically putting together a group of jobbers to basically just fill in the slots until they can go through the next election cycle. And that's what I believe is happening here as related to Kamala Harris. The people in the party don't have much faith in her, because if they were to have had faith in her as a vice president, a more serious contender would have stepped up to be her vice president. But when we look at people like Josh Shapiro and Gavin Newsom, Chuck Schumer, and even Andrew Cuomo, none of those people look to step up to be her running mate because they realize that there's not much they can do to run this race at this point. Because with only 100 days to build a campaign, there's no way to really get momentum behind Kamala Harris, especially when you start taking a critical look at Kamala Harris's overall track record as a politician. Because while Kamala Harris may basically meet the check marks as related to different boxes for diversity and inclusion, she doesn't really have a plan for the White House, and that's what a person who wants to be president wants to have. They want to have a platform and an agenda to run on. So Kamala Harris at this point is looking like a jobber, similar to what Michael Dukakis and Lloyd Bentsen looked like in 1988, and more so looking more like Walter Mondale and Geraldine Ferraro in 1984. Now, back in 1984, Walter Mondale, the vice president under Jimmy Carter, basically wanted to shake up the race by showing how progressive he was by picking Geraldine Ferraro to be the first female vice president. And basically, after making that nomination, yes, it generated a lot of press and it generated a lot of controversy. However, in 1984, there was mourning in America as Ronald Reagan basically took every state in the Union except one due to the weakness of the Blue Party ticket under Walter Mondale, and Walter Mondale didn't have a leg to stand on as related to Reagan's economy. He didn't have a leg to stand on as related to Reagan's foreign policy, and he basically, coming as the vice president of Jimmy Carter, was not looking strong because Jimmy Carter's presidency was one of the weakest presidencies. So when I look at what's happening with Kamala Harris, it really reminds me a lot of what happened with Walter Mondale's ticket. Walter Mondale's ticket was basically doomed from day one, but they still had to go out here and make an effort, similar to the way a jobber wrestler has to make an effort against a popular wrestler in a wrestling match. And usually the jobber is paid to lose and basically make the star look good. And basically that's what's happening here as related to the 2024 election cycle. Kamala Harris basically is being set up to be the jobber, similar to the way that Walter Mondale was in 1984 and the way Michael Dukakis was in 1988, because in both of those cases, the Blue Party did not have an agenda, did not have a direction, did not have a plan, and that was basically clear from the way they ran Joe Biden here in 2024. The way they ran Joe Biden here in 2024, the Blue Party basically has shown that it has no real ideas, no real vision. It's just running on feelings, and those caught up in their feelings about how polarized things are as related to politics think that this is a race, but there is no real race at all, because Joe Biden's whole platform doesn't have a leg to stand on, because he said we were going to build back better, but nothing is built, nothing is back, nothing is better, and under his incompetent leadership, sadly, America is in a worse place than it was during the pandemic, and under his leadership, we really don't have any sort of control over issues like inflation, over issues like the whole state of the economy, where we're told things are doing well, but companies continue to lay off and go bankrupt. Like recently, Buca de Beppo, the restaurant chain, said that it was filing for bankruptcy, and before that you had Red Lobster, not to mention other companies filing for bankruptcy due to the dysfunctional fiscal policy of Biden's Federal Reserve. And this is the platform that Kamala Harris has been handed to basically manage. And sadly, when it comes to Kamala Harris, she's so giddy and in her feelings about being the second female presidential candidate that she can't see that she's being set up to be the punchline of a cruel joke. Now, when I look at Kamala Harris's choice for a running mate, I realize that she's being set up to be, again, this jobber who's basically being set up to be the punchline of a cruel joke being played not only on Kamala Harris, but on those who look to support her. Now, I am no supporter of Donald Trump. I don't really support Donald Trump at all. So some people will come out here with that straw man argument. I'm just objectively looking at the situation, and as I objectively look at the situation, I see where the Blue Party basically is throwing in the towel as related to the 2024 campaign, and realizing that they basically have already lost as related to things, because they, one, don't have a vision, two, don't have a direction, and three, don't know where they want to go. And that's shown in this vice presidential contender of Tim Walz, who basically, even though he's gotten a second term as governor, basically shows us how incompetent he is based on many of the policies that he put in place during the time of the pandemic and the George Floyd riots that went on in that time, and his other policies like going out here and putting tampons in boys' bathrooms. This is not an indicator of a man who you would think would be fit to take over the office of president if Kamala Harris were to pass. No, this guy basically is, again, similar to what I see in pro wrestling in being a jobber like Mario Mancini or Don Driggers. Basically, what we've got here is a tag team of Blue Party jobbers being set up to fail and sadly don't know it. Sadly, don't know it because many of these individuals out here are playing political Candyland when the game is chess. And as they play Candyland, they don't see how the Blue Party has basically gone out here and had walked away from 2024 because, again, if they really were confident, they would have gone out here and looked to recruit a more credible candidate, and again would have looked to recruit that more credible candidate because they would have wanted to try to win this cycle. But with the economy not doing well, those more serious contenders like a Gavin Newsom are stepping back and basically letting this cycle run. And sadly, many Americans are too caught up in their feelings about the empty symbolism of a Kamala Harris campaign to see the chess moves being made by the more serious players on the Blue Party board. Because the decision to nominate Kamala Harris, yes, it may get a lot of people emotional about the first minority woman being nominated to be president. However, the nomination of Kamala Harris basically is something that's being done as an empty symbolic gesture because they basically had nobody else to run. And under the Constitution, they had to run Kamala Harris because there's no way they could get another nominee to be presented as the Blue Party candidate. And that's the reason why they're basically running Kamala Harris and just basically running the clock out. But you can't explain this to most people who have gotten so caught up in our polarized media. And many people, especially black women, believed that this was, again, a decision to basically promote representation. But the whole thing that the Blue Party is just representing is a default candidate they really don't believe in, because this decision to run Tim Walz basically shows how little confidence they have in Kamala Harris as a candidate. But you can't explain this to most people who are caught up in their emotions to say that they're with her, when it's clear to me that the party isn't really with her. No, this decision to run Tim Walz basically shows me how little faith they have in Kamala Harris as a candidate, because they already know that she's basically, again, you could go out here and generate a lot of hype, but the whole thing is they have no agenda to run behind her, because the whole thing is that running Kamala Harris means that she has to run on Joe Biden's abysmal record. And as she has to run on Joe Biden's abysmal record, she has to basically take ownership for all of his failures, and also has to take accountability for her horrible record as a senator, as a attorney general, and as a prosecutor, where she basically showed how little regard she had for the black voters that Joe Biden hoped to get when he picked her as a vice president in 2020. And in 2024, the Blue Party hoped to use her to again energize the base of black voters by splitting the black vote, by hoping that they could go out here and get all of these polarized black females to start running to vote for Kamala Harris, when most foundational black Americans said that they were going to stay home when they had to deal with Joe Biden basically throwing a middle finger up at them in 2020, when he told black people that he could do nothing for black people and they needed to go to Hispanics. So they already knew that they had alienated the black voting base, and as they alienated the black voting base, they realized that they basically weren't going to be able to get the black vote with Joe Biden, but they hoped to scavenge some black votes by creating some polarization from the gender war. They hoped to create some polarization from the gender war and get black women to get behind Kamala Harris. But this decision to pick Tim Walz basically throws cold water on the entire ticket, because when it comes to Tim Walz, he basically is so far to the left that it basically de-incentivizes many of those voters on the center from thinking about ever considering voting for this ticket. So when I looked at this decision to pick Tim Walz, I basically saw it as the Blue Party basically throwing in the towel. And again, I am no Donald Trump supporter, but I can see the subtle politics transpiring around me. And as I see the subtle politics transpiring around me, I basically see where the entire Blue Party basically doesn't have a platform to run on, doesn't have an agenda to run on, and basically, like a group of WWE jobbers, are basically, again, there to be enhancement talent. Enhancement talent basically there to basically make it look like you're doing something when you're doing nothing at all. Now, when it comes to the black voter, this decision to pick Tim Walz further makes it where you want to stay home, and you makes it where you want to stay home because the only thing Kamala Harris has to offer black people is disrespect, because for her to pick Megan Thee Stallion to open up her rally shows how little respect she has for black people. She basically thinks she can get by shucking and jiving and entertaining black folks, but doesn't want to talk to us about giving us anything tangible in exchange for our vote. And since she can't give us, is not wanting to talk to us about giving us anything tangible for our vote, then we have no real incentive to go vote for a ticket that basically is the bizarro version of the 1984 presidential ticket, where instead of Geraldine Ferraro being the vice president, Geraldine Ferraro is running for president, and Walter Mondale is running for vice president. We've got a pair of jobbers looking to run for office, and only a group of people who are just, again, completely backwards would think to vote for a ticket like this that's just slapped together, that really doesn't have anything to offer the base or galvanize the base. There's nothing really here on this ticket outside of the weak argument that they are not Donald Trump. And again, this argument is not strong, because telling me that you're not Donald Trump is not a reason to vote for somebody to represent your country as its president and represent you in the national and international world. No, that's not a reason, and not logical, because I could just say I am Sean James and I am not Donald Trump. And if I'm Sean James and not Donald Trump, that's the whole case of the argument. I mean, if you put me on a debate stage and I made that argument, people would look at me with a side eye. But the Blue Party makes this statement to the world with Joe Biden, and he got away with it because of the pandemic going on. But now that we have had 3 years of Joe Biden's economy, which goes into a state of decline due to him creating policies like ending the Keystone Pipeline, giving thousands of dollars to people with the American American Rescue Plan, and the other act that he passed that basically, again, didn't really help Americans. I mean, he's got all of these, I think it was Jobs and Something Act, all of these policies didn't really help Americans and made the economy's inflation progressively worse. Inflation that was basically created by the pandemic and policies like their vaccine mandates, which basically, again, did damage to the economy. And again, Kamala Harris thinks that she can run on this, and she's spellbound and caught up in the attention she's receiving and thinks she can run on this. But this is a record that the Blue Party is running away from, because their top contenders didn't want to run with Kamala Harris. No, they are running away and leaving her to be the punchline of a cruel joke, because they know that Tim Walz basically is a guy who basically is a complete mess as related to Minnesota, and basically setting up to be the fall, and setting Kamala Harris up to be the fall girl, and basically making it where she has to take the accountability for all of Joe Biden's failures. And they don't really see the big picture. And again, a lot of people, you can't explain nothing to them. So when it comes to this whole 2024 presidential cycle, I can see the chess moves being made. And these chess moves basically show me that the Blue Party sees the checkmate, and as they see the checkmate, they realize that they have no candidate to run against Donald Trump. and sadly don't have one because they didn't groom one for over 30 years, didn't groom one to be out here. No, that's what we saw in 2000 after Al Gore wound up losing. The Blue Party hasn't really prepared a candidate to set forth their agenda or their direction. And as they've been coasting, what we've seen is them go out here and bring out guys like Barack Obama and Joe Biden, who barely can function. And Kamala Harris is like the pinnacle of incompetence. She's the pinnacle of incompetence in that, yes, she's a woman, but she's an empty symbolic candidate, who's an empty suit, like her predecessor, Barack Obama. And what she wants to do is run on the Barack Obama playbook, hoping this will get her in the door based on some people call DEI standard. But when I look at Kamala Harris as a candidate and this vice presidential candidate, I don't see a winning ticket. No, I see a ticket on the level of Dukakis Benson in '88, and more so a ticket that's as weak as Mondale Ferraro in 1984, a weak ticket for a nation that is going into a state of decline because we don't groom leaders, we don't create leaders. And since we don't create leaders, what happens is we have a bunch of followers. And sadly, with Kamala Harris, we have the Blue Party that is blind, leading the blind, and the American nation basically on the road to falling into a ditch. Now, if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my books on the SJS Direct Imprint, you can find them on Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get your copy of ISIS Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.